The private dining salon of the Al Noor Peninsula Hotel was designed for men who never heard the word no. Gold-veined marble, a chandelier dimmed to a warm, predatory glow, and a 10-seat table arranged so the most powerful man could see every micro-reaction in the room. At the far end sat Sheikh Rashid Al Haman, pen uncapped, waiting to sign a 240 meters cultural acquisition that would crown his legacy. A 14th century, illuminated manuscript said to originate from a royal scriptorium lost to time. He wasn't supposed to notice the waitress, but he did, the slight woman pouring still water with a careful, almost invisible posture. Her black hair was tied low, her uniform perfectly plain, her gaze angled downward with practiced smallness. To him, she was just part of the furniture. When she set a glass by his elbow, one of his advisors muttered something in a clipped Gulf dialect. A joke about the girl who moves like she fears sound. The sheikh replied just as sharply, adding a remark about how people like her learn Arabic from soap operas. The table laughed. She placed the last glass, her hand steady but her breath shallow, and answered softly, in the pure, resonant cadence of classical Arabic, the kind used in royal treaties and ancient court rituals. The room froze. The sound didn't match the uniform, or the job, or the quiet posture. It was refined, precise, with a controlled melody that only scholars or royalty ever mastered. The sheikh's pen stopped mid-air. His advisors exchanged glances, suddenly unsure of what, or who, exactly had just spoken. She bowed her head, stepped back, and walked toward the door with calm she didn't feel. Somewhere between humiliation and revelation, silence rearranged itself around her. He stared at her walking away, unable to understand how he had missed someone like her. She expected to be dismissed. Invisible people always were. Instead, before she reached the door, a low command rolled across the room. The sheikh's voice, sharp, authoritative, and tinged with something new. Uncertainty. Wait. She stopped. Every advisor, curator, and security officer watched her as though a shadow had suddenly declared itself sentient. She turned slowly, her spine straightening just enough to conceal the tremor pushing against her ribs. "Repeat what you said," the sheikh demanded, his Gulf dialect clipped with suspicion. She did. This time, her tone was quieter, softer, but still shaped with the same impossible precision. Each consonant a blade, each vowel a thread pulled from centuries of formal rhetoric. She watched the men exchange looks, some amused, others irritated. Scholars were expected in this room. Waitresses were not. One of the consultants, a self-proclaimed manuscript expert flown in from London, attempted to laugh the moment away. "It's just memorized phrases," he said. "Anyone can rehearse a few lines." Another chimed in. "Besides, she probably grew up hearing these forms. Nothing special." But the sheikh didn't blink. He had been raised among men who valued lineage, cadence, and linguistic purity almost as much as land. He could distinguish textbook recitation from trained articulation, and what he heard in her voice was not memorization, it was mastery. "Who taught you that dialect?" he asked. Her throat tightened. She felt the room leaning toward her like a slow tide. "No one," she said. "I studied alone." One advisor scoffed loudly. "Studied? Where? Oh, on break between clearing plates." A few men chuckled. Their laughter didn't sting. She had heard worse, but it carved something old in her chest. The familiar ache of being underestimated, of being treated like background noise. The sheikh raised a hand. Silence snapped into place. He watched her with narrowed eyes, calculating. He was a man accustomed to reading contracts and people with equal speed, yet this woman, this waitress who had just spoken a dialect associated with royal education, didn't fit any category. "Stay," he said. "You will remain for the presentation." She hesitated for one breath, then nodded. A storm gathered quietly under her ribs. Dread, curiosity, fear of being seen too closely. As she stepped back to the wall, she felt every gaze tighten around her. Sometimes, the smallest moment cracks open the truth that was waiting underneath. She moved to the far corner of the room, positioning herself near a service sideboard where no one would think to engage with her again. But now every sound felt amplified. The shuffle of documents, the click of the sheik's pen, the polished hum of the projector, warming up for the grand presentation. Her pulse hammered beneath her collar, heat gathering behind her ears. She hated attention. Attention had never brought her good things. Her name was Lena, 29. Holder of a forgotten student visa turned precarious work permit, she lived in a windowless room behind an elderly landlady's kitchen where the walls smelled of turmeric and thyme. Her university years, once full of ambitions in philology, historical linguistics, and ancient codices, had collapsed under unpaid fees and bureaucratic errors no one cared to fix. She had been brilliant once. Professors said so. Until brilliance became irrelevant to survival. Debt, immigration fear, and unpaid research loans had pushed her into a world where intellect didn't matter. Only silence, speed, and the ability to anticipate a client's needs before they spoke. She became exceptionally skilled at vanishing in plain sight. Her knowledge lived only in the notebooks hidden under her mattress, pages filled with scripts, glosses, archaic dialect studies, and comparisons between royal court registers from multiple eras. The irony was cruel. She was more qualified to authenticate medieval manuscripts than any of the consultants hired tonight. Yet she served them water. From her corner, Lena watched the experts prepare to unveil the manuscript. Velvet gloves, humidity-controlled case, reverent whispers. She knew these rituals. She had studied them. But she kept her eyes down, refusing to betray anything. She feared being noticed, truly noticed. Exposure, even of talent, could lead to questions. Questions led to paperwork. Paperwork led to scrutiny. And scrutiny could end her life here. But the sheikh kept glancing at her. Not lecherously, not cruelly, but with the unnerving focus of a man trying to solve a puzzle. She wished he would stop. She wished she could shrink back into the soft anonymity she had spent years perfecting. Yet fate does not knock. It slips a hand under the door and pulls. And sometimes the thing you fear seeing you is the thing you were meant to face. The curator began the presentation with the pomp of a man convinced of his own indispensability. Lights dimmed. A velvet-draped cart rolled forward. The manuscript's protective case glowed softly as it slid onto the table facing the sheikh. Lena kept her eyes trained on the floor, pretending to polish a set of already spotless glasses. She didn't want to be drawn into this room's gravity. But the room had decided otherwise. "Bring the waitress closer," the London consultant said suddenly, chuckling as if it were a harmless joke. "If she enjoys classical forms so much, let her hear real history." A few men snickered. Lena froze. Her lungs compressed as if someone had tightened a belt beneath her ribs. She didn't want to stand near the manuscript. Not because she wasn't capable, but because proximity meant visibility. Visibility meant risk. The sheikh didn't laugh. He simply gestured with 2 fingers. "Come forward." His voice was calm, authoritative, impossible to refuse. She stepped toward the table, each footfall measured, her palms damp against her sides. She stopped 1 meter from the display, close enough to smell the faint blend of archival linen and old ink. The curator continued his speech, projecting diagrams and provenance documents on the wall. "This is the jewel of the lost Bahrani Royal Scriptorium," he announced. a lineage document chronicling the poetic and legal rights of succession from the late 14th century. Near pristine condition. Unbroken chain of ownership. Lena's skin prickled. She had spent her academic years studying the exact scriptorium they were referencing. She knew its hallmarks, the structure of its calligraphy, the unique mineral composition of its inks. She had written a thesis draft, never submitted, on the micro-ornamental variations of its illuminated initials. She could spot a forgery in seconds, but she said nothing. Silence was survival. A consultant smirked at her as if she were entertainment. "Do you recognize any of this? Or is it all above your pay grade?" She kept her face still, neutral, invisible. But the Sheikh's gaze sharpened again. He saw the flicker in her eyes, the tiny reflex she couldn't suppress. Curiosity, recognition, alarm. "Answer him," the Sheikh said. She swallowed. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I recognize the style, sir." The men laughed, mocking, triumphant, dismissive. She tried to pull back into herself, into the quiet corner where she belonged, but the Sheikh's interest had become a gravitational force she couldn't escape. He tapped his pen once on the folder before him, eyes never leaving her. "She will stay," he said to his advisors. "She will listen to the entire presentation, and no one will interrupt her again." A cold hush spread through the room. Sometimes you're pushed into the light because someone senses the truth you're still afraid to claim. The presentation shifted into its performative phase. Consultants trading rehearsed lines, curators praising the manuscript's immaculate authenticity, and the projector displaying magnified illuminations meant to dazzle the Sheikh into confidence. Lena stood at the table's edge, trying to fold herself into stillness. She wasn't part of this world anymore. She wasn't supposed to analyze, question, or notice. She was here to refill glasses, nothing more. But her mind betrayed her. Every illuminated page shown on the screen tugged at her training. Script curvature, line spacing, pigment density, stroke pressure. Even from a distance, even without touching the page, she could feel inconsistencies whispering at her like hairline fractures in glass. The experts kept talking. The gold leaf is original. The ink's oxidation matches the period. Or the marginalia corresponds with recorded scribal habits. None of this soothed her. Something was off, not visually, but rhythmically. True manuscripts from the Bharani scriptorium had a cadence, a proportional music. Their scribes wrote with a discipline bordering on ceremonial. Every flourish had an ancestry, every angle had a meaning, but this manuscript's script hesitated. There were 2 micro-pauses in the calligraphic line that no trained 14th century scribe would ever allow. They were so small, they would escape anyone who hadn't spent nights absorbing the ancient pattern like prayer. Lena's pulse quickened. The curator changed the slide, projecting a close-up of the colophon, the scribe's signature line. The room murmured with admiration, yet Lena felt her breath knock against her ribs. The colophon was wrong. Not obviously, certainly not to the men who now stood in a semicircle of certainty and self-congratulation. But structurally, the phrasing was almost perfect, too perfect. As if constructed by someone who had studied the style without ever living inside its logic. Her fingertips twitched at her sides. She kept her expression neutral, but inside her nerves were flaring like struck wires. She wanted to step back, to become invisible again, but the Sheikh's presence loomed beside her. Quiet, observant, waiting. He noticed the slight tension in her jaw. "Something concerns you," he said quietly, not to challenge her, but as if stating a fact. A shiver went through her. She shook her head, but it was too late. He'd seen the micro-reaction. So had two consultants who exchanged smirks, already preparing to mock whatever she said. She lowered her gaze, fighting the instinct to disappear. Her throat constricted. She didn't want to speak, didn't want to risk her life unraveling in front of these men. But the manuscript kept calling to her with its subtle wrongness, like a whispered plea only she could hear. Truth has a way of finding the person least ready to carry it. The curator moved to the final portion of the presentation. Authenticity verification. A portable spectrographic lamp was switched on, casting a cool, forensic glow over the manuscript. The room leaned in. The sheikh rested both hands on the table, his attention sharp enough to cut through steel. Lena stood motionless, but internally she was unraveling thread by thread. The curator began listing laboratory results. Ink dating, vellum analysis, carbon decay curves, reciting them with the smug confidence of a man certain he had delivered an unassailable masterpiece. The consultants nodded along, using words like conclusive, irrefutable, and once-in-a-lifetime acquisition. But Lena didn't hear their certainty. She heard the silence underneath it. The silence created when something elegant is wrong in a way too small to detect with machines. Her stomach tightened. The spectrographic lamp passed over the gold leaf initials, and she saw it. A faint shimmer too chemically consistent. Centuries-old gold leaf should have reflected in subtle variations, the result of manual pressing. This shimmer was uniform, manufactured. Her hand twitched involuntarily. The London consultant noticed and smirked. Our waitress seems deeply moved by the beauty of history. Another added, or deeply confused by it. A small burst of laughter rose from the group. Lena said nothing. She couldn't. If she opened her mouth right now, the truth might fall out in a single uncontrolled spill. And truth, in this room, would not be welcomed. The sheikh, however, did not laugh. His focus now split between the manuscript and the woman who kept reacting to it. He shifted slightly toward her. Barely perceptible, but intentional. "What is it you see?" he asked, voice low, controlled. Her breath caught. She shook her head again. "Nothing, sir." It was the safest lie she had, but the London consultant stepped closer, invading her space with the casual entitlement of a man who assumed she had no right to it. "Then why," he said, "are you flinching every time the lamp moves?" Heat flooded her cheeks. Humiliation, fear, pressure. She felt the weight of the room pressing her down, like a thumb against a match waiting to ignite. She forced herself to stand still, adopting the stillness she had mastered over years of invisibility. The kind of stillness that kept her from being noticed, questioned, or dismissed from jobs she desperately needed. But invisibility no longer belonged to her. Not after the moment she spoke in that dialect. Not after the sheikh noticed the flicker in her eyes. The lamp passed once more over the manuscript, and the shimmer repeated, perfectly consistent. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She knew what it meant. She knew what it had to mean. And she also knew that voicing it now could tear open the entire transaction, bringing consequences far bigger than this room. The sheikh's voice broke the silence again. "You're seeing something," he said, "even if you won't admit it." A tremor moved down her spine. Sometimes the truth waits until you're cornered, and then refuses to let you stay silent. The manuscript case was opened. A hush fell over the room, not reverent but anticipatory, like the intake of breath before a verdict. The vellum pages gave off that familiar, fragile scent of aging protein and dust trapped between centuries. A smell Lena loved, a smell she hadn't been near since her university library days, when she still believed her future would be shaped by scholarship rather than survival. The curator handed the sheikh a pair of white cotton gloves. "If you'd like to turn the pages yourself, sir," It was theater, of course. The curated moment where a billionaire brushes history with his fingertips. Rashid Al-Haman slipped the gloves on slowly, his eyes flicking once toward Lena, as though he expected her to react to even this. She didn't. She couldn't afford to. He lifted a page delicately. Gold accents glimmered under the lamp. The advisors murmured in admiration, already envisioning headlines, prestige, cultural dominance. But Lena saw only fractures. Tiny deviations in brush pressure, faint inconsistencies in pigment saturation, and the one detail that made her lungs constrict: the micro indentations along the border. Those weren't made by a 14th century stylus. They were made by a 21st century metal ruling tool. She swallowed hard. The London consultant noticed the shift in her breathing and rolled his eyes dramatically. Our waitress is hyperventilating over decorative lines now. Should someone bring her water? Another added, she might faint if she sees the royal seal. Their laughter was knives wrapped in velvet. Lena stared at the floor, her pulse vibrating against her throat. Every instinct told her to retreat. Back to anonymity, back to silence, back to safety. But something stronger kept her anchored in place. The manuscript's wrongness was no longer a suspicion. It was a certainty. The sheikh turned another page. Her stomach dropped. The illuminated heading used a grammatical structure forbidden in the Bahrani scriptorium's royal works. No scribe from that lineage would have used it. Ever. Not even once. She closed her eyes briefly, a tremor escaping her control. Rashid noticed. "What did you just see?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. The room tightened. The consultants stared at her with growing irritation. How dare the waitress disturb their performance? How dare she react to details they themselves had failed to notice? "Speak," the London expert said, voice sharp. "If you insist on making faces, at least explain them." She stayed silent. Fear pressed against her ribs, cold and constricting. If she said one wrong word, she could lose everything. Her job, her shelter, her fragile immigration status. And if they laughed, if they dismissed her, the sheikh would still sign. He would still lose 240, and she would carry the guilt. But exposing a forgery this large, in this room, before these men, could destroy her. The sheikh turned toward her, fully now. "If there is something," he said, "you owe me the truth." Her throat burned. She felt the entire room waiting. For her humiliation, for her silence, or for her collapse. She knew she was only one breath away from the moment she had always feared, the moment invisibility failed her completely. Truth, once awakened, will not wait politely. The sheikh reached the final page of the manuscript. The dedication leaf. A soft gasp passed through the room. The advisors had been waiting for this moment. The gilded seal, the ornate calligraphy, the ceremonial flourish that supposedly authenticated everything. But Lena felt the air thicken. No one else noticed it. The tiny irregularity sitting silently at the bottom margin, like a grain of sand on polished glass. It was the kind of flaw only someone who had lived inside these scripts could recognize. The kind that whispered, "Look closer, even when doing so might ruin you." Her fingers curled at her sides. The sheikh lifted the final page a fraction, and that was when she saw it. The microscopic bleed of ink near the lower corner, barely visible. Invisible to anyone without specialized training. But she recognized the pattern instantly. The scriptorium's ink never bled. It crystallized. This bleed was modern. Her breath hitched, a tiny, involuntary sound. The London consultant pounced. "Again?" he said mockingly. "Do these pages cause her emotional distress?" A ripple of laughter floated around the room. But the sheikh did not laugh. He watched her reaction with a stillness that carried weight. He set the page down. "What did you notice?" His voice was calm, but the command underneath it was unmistakable. Lena's throat tightened. She didn't want this moment. She didn't want the room watching her, but she couldn't unsee what she had seen. Her voice came out in a near whisper. "May I look closer at the edge of that page?" The room erupted with irritation. "She can't touch it. This is absurd. She's not trained. She'll contaminate the vellum." The curator's face flushed with outrage. "She is not authorized to handle a priceless artifact." The sheikh held up his hand, a gesture that silenced the entire room. His gaze locked on her. "You do not touch it," he said, "but you may step closer." The curator stiffened, but he obeyed. Lena moved forward, her steps small, deliberate. She leaned in, not touching the manuscript, just inspecting the margin, watching the faint glisten of the ink bleed under the spectrographic lamp. There, a pigment halo, just a few microns wide. But it should not exist on a 14th century vellum leaf. Her heart pounded. She lifted her eyes. "It's modern," she whispered. A collective scoff burst from the consultants. "Impossible. Ridiculous. She's guessing. She doesn't know what she's looking at." But the sheikh didn't scoff. He leaned closer to her, lowering his voice to a tone only she could hear. "You're certain?" She nodded, barely breathing. "Ink from the Barani scriptorium doesn't bleed. Ever." He stared at her, truly stared, as if recalibrating everything he thought he knew about her. The curator slammed a hand on the table. "This is outrageous. She's a waitress, not an expert." But the sheikh's next words cut through the room like a blade. "Then let her speak," he said. "If she is wrong, I lose nothing. But if she is right," he paused, "I avoid a catastrophe." A tremor moved through Lena's chest. This was the first breach in their certainty, the first crack in the scheme. Truth had stepped into the room, and it wasn't leaving. Sometimes the smallest fracture is enough to collapse an empire built on lies. The men resumed talking over one another, trying to drown her out with authority, volume, and titles. The curator loudly cited laboratory tests. The London consultant puffed himself up like an offended academic bird, insisting modern ink bleed was scientifically impossible, given their authenticity reports. The sheikh listened to none of them. He held the contract folder open in front of him, pen uncapped, hovering just above the signature line. The tension in the room shifted, no longer dismissive, but urgent. Everyone wanted him to sign now, while momentum leaned in their favor. Lena felt her stomach twist. The contract was thick, heavy, bound with ribbon and legal clauses she could barely see from this distance. But she sensed danger in it. Something coiled beneath the language. The curator leaned forward. "Sir, the documentation is impeccable. We should proceed." The London expert added, "We are minutes away from securing a once-in-a-generation artifact. I strongly advise finalizing the acquisition." Another advisor chimed in. "This hesitation could cost us the deal." The sheikh's grip tightened around the pen. He was about to sign, her chest constricted. She didn't know how she knew. Maybe instinct, maybe training, maybe the same intuition that had haunted her throughout the presentation. But she felt a hidden trap inside that contract, something designed to snap shut the moment ink touched paper. Her breathing sharpened. He lowered the pen. No. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She reacted. "Stop." The word tore out of her louder than she meant. Firm, clear, slicing through every layer of hierarchy in the room. A stunned silence detonated outward. Every head snapped toward her. The curator's face turned blood red. The consultant stared as though she'd committed an act of blasphemy. Two security officers straightened, waiting for the command to remove her. But the sheikh, he froze mid-motion. Her heart hammered, her legs almost buckled, but she pushed through the fear, stepped forward, and continued, this time in flawless, resonant classical Arabic, her voice echoing in the private salon like something carved from marble. Do not sign. There are more inconsistencies. And the dedication leaf is not the only anomaly. The room stopped breathing. Even the consultants, mid-protest, mid-rage, silenced themselves, stunned by the authority in her tone. The cadence she used was the dialect of treaties, coronations, and sovereign declarations. It overrode them instinctively, like an ancient reflex of obedience. Lena felt the floor rocking beneath her, but she didn't retreat. She pointed, not touching, but indicating the margin with professional precision. The ink bleed is one of 3 issues. The others are in the illumination symmetry and the vellum ruling. Both are inconsistent with the Barani royal workshops, and your authenticity reports, she inhaled, were manipulated. Gasps, anger, disbelief. The curator slammed both hands on the table. This is outrageous. She is inventing false claims. But the sheikh lifted his hand, silencing him instantly. Explain, he told her, from the beginning. Her pulse skittered, but the path was chosen now. There was no retreating. She took another breath and stepped fully into the light she had avoided her entire life. Sometimes a single word, spoken at the right second, overturns every assumption in the room, including your own. She stood at the head of the table now. The place reserved for experts, never for servers. Her pulse was a war drum beneath her skin, but her voice emerged steady, shaped by years of disciplined study and silence. She pointed, not touching the manuscript, but guiding the sheikh's eyes with exact precision. First, she said, the illumination symmetry. The consultants exchanged irritated glances. Rashid ignored them. Lena continued, her tone clinical, forensic. In the Bahrani royal scriptorium, illuminations were constructed on a sacred ratio, 3 nested geometries that never, not once, break sequence. Here. She leaned in. The second geometry collapses by 0.5 millimeter. The London consultant scoffed. 0.5 millimeter is irrelevant. She turned to him, eyes calm but unyielding. Not to scribes who trained for 20 years before, being allowed to illuminate a single capital letter. The sheikh nodded slowly. Continue. She pointed to the margin. Second, the vellum ruling lines. These indentations are machine straight. Medieval ruling was done by stylus. Pressure varies, angle changes. The fiber compression is asymmetrical. Here it's uniform, industrial. Murmurs spread around the table. The curator's face began to drain of color. Lena inhaled carefully, anchoring herself. And third, her voice lowered. The colophon. The sheikh leaned closer. The advisors followed. She recited the scribe's phrasing aloud. Every syllable perfect, every cadence echoing court tradition. Then repeated the manuscript's version. The difference was microscopic, but devastating. The manuscript uses a formulation reserved only for royal proclamations issued after the scriptorium was dissolved. Whoever forged it borrowed language from the wrong century. Silence hit the room like falling stone. She wasn't done. She stepped back and nodded toward the authenticity report folder. The spectrographic analysis is correct, but incomplete, because someone removed the fluorescence markers for synthetic gold. They tested the vellum. They didn't test the gilding. The curator opened his mouth, but she kept going. And the ink testing? She looked at the sheikh directly now. The report only shows carbon decay curves, not mineral composition. That omission is deliberate. If mineral testing had been done, they would have found modern binders. The London consultant stuttered. This is speculation. No, she said softly. It's pattern recognition. She turned toward the dedication leaf again. That microscopic bleed at the corner comes from a solvent used in contemporary restoration workshops. Someone tried to distress modern ink to resemble oxidation. The sheikh stiffened. Why distress modern ink? He asked. Unless the entire manuscript, she said, is a reconstruction. The words detonated. A reconstruction. A high-end forgery. A 240 millimeters lie. The consultants erupted in protest, shouting, pointing, defending their reputations. The curator demanded she be removed from the room. Someone knocked over a water glass. But none of it mattered, because the sheikh wasn't listening to any of them. He was watching her, this small, invisible woman, dismantle an empire of fraud with nothing but knowledge they didn't think she possessed. He set his pen down. Show me the contractual risk, he said quietly. Her breath caught. He believed her. And now the real trap, the one hidden in legal language, not ink, was about to surface. Knowledge, when spoken without fear, can strike harder than any blade. The contract lay open like a quiet predator on the table. Thick parchment, embossed edges, elegant typography designed to disguise its teeth. The advisors hovered anxiously, their confidence now cracked, their voices low but brittle. Lena stepped closer. Her hands trembled, so she clasped them together behind her back to keep the shaking invisible. She had never examined a multi-million-dollar acquisition contract before, but language, especially deceptive language, was her terrain. Turn to the final clause, she said softly. The sheikh obeyed without hesitation. The curator objected. Sir, this is not appropriate. Rashid cut him off. Enough. They fell silent. Lena leaned in beside the sheikh, close enough to see the embossed lettering, close enough to feel the gravity of what she was about to expose pull her deeper into danger. There, she whispered, pointing to a paragraph buried in the fine print. Read the subclause under post-acquisition verification. The sheikh scanned it. His jaw hardened. Explain, he said. Lena inhaled. This clause reverses liability. The room tensed. In plain terms, she continued, if the manuscript is found to be inauthentic at any point, even immediately, the buyer assumes full responsibility. You cannot sue, you cannot recover costs, you cannot demand compensation. Several advisors paled. She wasn't finished. And look at the phrasing. Buyer acknowledges potential restoration irregularities inherent to the preservation of medieval vellum. The sheikh's brows knit. Irregularities? It's a shield, she said. A preemptive excuse. They inserted language implying that modern markers or anomalies are natural byproducts of restoration, even though this manuscript wasn't restored. It was fabricated. A cold silence rippled outward. She pointed to another line. And this subclause binds you to a non-disclosure agreement. If you discover the forgery, you cannot speak publicly, you cannot warn museums, you cannot even tell your own board. One advisor whispered, horrified, My God! Lena's voice steadied further, fear thinning into clarity. But the most dangerous part is here. She tapped the last sentence. Disputes shall be resolved exclusively in the seller's jurisdiction. The London consultant blinked. Meaning what? It means, she said, that even if you won the case morally, you would lose it legally. Their courts, their precedents, their terms. She looked directly at the sheikh. This contract wasn't written to sell you a manuscript. It was written to trap you in an irreversible loss. The curator's voice cracked in protest. She's not qualified. But Rashid didn't even glance at him. His eyes stayed on her. A long, tense beat passed. The weight of 240 millimeters, almost lost, hung thick in the air. Then he closed the contract folder with a soft, controlled click. The sound of a man realizing how close he came to disaster. The consultants looked shaken. The curator looked sick. Security officers exchanged uncertain glances. Lena exhaled shakily, a small release of air she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The trap was exposed. The performance was shattered, and the men who mocked her were left speechless. Sometimes, the most dangerous weapon in a negotiation is the truth no one expects you to know. The men who had strutted through the presentation now stood like actors waiting for the stage to fall out from under them. Their rehearsed confidence drained into fragile silence. The air smelled of sweat, panic, and the bitter metallic tang of reputations shredding. The curator tried to gather himself first. "This is absurd," he sputtered. One untrained waitress cannot overturn." "She didn't overturn anything," the sheikh said quietly. "She revealed what you hoped I would not see." The curator froze. Rashid stood, slowly, deliberately, the contract folder in his hand. His posture was regal in the low amber lighting, but his expression was carved in stone. He turned to the consultants. "You vouched for this manuscript." The London expert stammered. "Based on the tests we were shown, and you," he said, turning to another consultant, "assured me the chain of provenance was unbroken." The man's voice cracked. It appeared so." "And you," he said to the curator, "told me this was the crown jewel of my legacy." The curator swallowed hard. "It can still be authenticated." Lena stepped forward before she could stop herself. "No, it can't." Every head jerked toward her. Rashid raised a brow, not in disapproval, but in acknowledgement. She continued, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "This isn't a partial forgery. It's a deliberate reconstruction using mixed-era templates. It was designed to pass superficial tests, but collapse under linguistic scrutiny." The London consultant hissed. "Linguistic scrutiny is hardly—" She cut him off gently, but firmly. "When the scribe's dialect doesn't match the century, the artifact is dead." The room spun into silence. The curator's face twisted in quiet desperation. "Sir, we can renegotiate. The seller may offer—" "The seller," Rashid said, "will answer for fraud." A consultant stepped forward nervously. "With respect, sir, involving legal authorities could expose us for nearly approving the purchase." Rashid turned to him slowly. "You fear embarrassment," he said. "I nearly lost 240 million. No one dared speak. He took one step closer to the table. His voice lowered, sharp enough to draw blood. "I want every name involved, every intermediary, every laboratory, every appraiser, and every person who touched this contract." The curator began to shake. Lena watched with a mixture of awe and dread. She had triggered this avalanche. She, the invisible woman. She hadn't meant to, but truth had momentum. Once spoken, it reshaped the room. The sheikh lifted the manuscript case gently, almost reverently, then set it down again as if laying a false relic into its coffin. "This," he said, "almost became part of my family legacy." His eyes darkened. "Instead, it will become evidence." Security shifted at the edges of the room. A consultant tried to flee the spotlight of blame. "Perhaps the irregularities are minor." "No," Rashid said, "they are intentional." He turned to Lena fully now, as if the others no longer existed. "You stopped me from signing a trap." A beat. "And you were the only person in this room who saw it." Her breath caught. The weight of what had just happened settled over everyone. The scheme was collapsing. Not with dramatic explosions, but with the quiet, devastating sound of truth dismantling arrogance. Sometimes collapse is not loud. Sometimes it is the sound of certainty dying. The room was no longer a negotiation chamber. It had transformed into a crime scene made of silence. The consultants huddled together, pale and stammering, each trying to calculate how much blame could be deflected and how much might inevitably stick. The curator, once swollen with authority, had shrunk into his tailored suit like a man drowning inside his own reputation. Lena remained still, not triumphant, not relieved, only suspended, as if one wrong breath could shatter the thin line separating her from the consequences of everything she had just revealed. Rashid turned to his security chief. "Lock the doors." A soft metallic click sealed the room. The curator jolted. "Sir, is that necessary?" "Yes," the sheikh replied, "until every document is photographed and every statement recorded." Two security officers stepped forward with small recording tablets. Their movements were methodical, clinical. The advisors stiffened. No one dared protest further. The London consultant tried first. He forced a smile, thin, trembling. "Sheikh Rashid, this may simply be an error in testing. We can verify with additional labs." "You had your chance to verify." Rashid's voice stayed calm, but each word struck like a measured hammer. "You cost me time. You nearly cost me my legacy." The consultant wilted. Rashid gestured toward the manuscript. "State your involvement." The man swallowed. I authenticated the ink decay curves." "And ignored mineral composition," Lena murmured. The consultant glared at her, a venomous flash. But before he could speak, Rashid intervened. "She is not the one on trial here," he said. "You are." The consultant's mouth snapped shut. Next, the curator. He tried for indignation. "Sir, if anyone misled us, it was the seller." "You curated the chain of provenance," Rashid said. "You vouched for it personally." "I was given papers." "Forged papers," Lena whispered, unable to stop herself. The curator whipped toward her. "I will not be undermined by someone who serves beverages." Rashid's eyes hardened. "Careful." The room's temperature seemed to drop. She uncovered what all of you failed to detect. "Or chose not to detect," Rashid continued. "Your arrogance cost you competence." The curator's shoulders collapsed inward. Security collected digital statements. Advisors stumbled through their explanations. Every expert tried to rewrite their memory of events, but the truth hovered above them like a cold, unblinking light. Lena watched all of it from her quiet corner, her heart pounding, her mind racing with fear she couldn't voice. She didn't belong here. She wasn't supposed to affect the world at this scale. And yet, she had. Rashid turned to the chief of staff. "Send copies of the contract to my legal team. Immediate review." Then, unexpectedly, he looked at Lena. There was no condescension in his gaze now. No dismissal. Only recognition. "You said earlier the anomalies were not accidental," he said. "If this forgery is deliberate—" "It is," she replied softly. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of her expertise. "What would you advise as my next step?" he asked. The room froze. The question was impossible, unthinkable. A billionaire asking advice. From the waitress, they mocked. Lena's breath faltered. She looked down, trying to steady herself. "Proceed carefully," she whispered. "Those who build traps rarely build just one." The sheikh considered her words. Truly considered them. Accountability wasn't loud. It was the slow, precise tightening of a noose around deception. The doors remained locked, the air heavy. The experts had given their recorded statements. Fragmented, defensive, contradictory. The curator had wilted into silent defeat. And yet, the center of gravity in the room wasn't any of them. It was the quiet woman standing near the polished sideboard, trying to make herself small again. But smallness no longer fit her. Rashid approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. Not crowding her, not looming, simply present. The contrast stunned the advisors. The most powerful man in the room was treating her as though she were an equal. Lena's pulse throbbed at her throat. "You understood this manuscript," he said softly. "Better than the people paid to protect me from fraud." She lowered her gaze. "I only recognize the patterns, sir." "No?" His voice tightened. "You saw what others ignored." He turned his head slightly, watching his consultants, who stood pale and trembling. "They defended the artifact. You defended the truth." The words struck deeper than he knew. She didn't feel like a defender of anything. She felt like a woman standing on a fault line she had just cracked open with her own voice. A woman who knew that speaking up often carried a cost. And tonight she had no idea what that cost would be. "I didn't intend to interfere," she said quietly. "I only reacted." "A reaction," he replied, "saved me 240 million. Behind him, the London consultant muttered under his breath, "We shouldn't be taking advice from a waitress." Rashid turned. "Say that again." The consultant froze, lips pale. The sheikh held his gaze. "Titles do not define competence. Truth does." A silence filled the space, thick, electric, dangerous in its clarity. Rashid faced Lena once more. His tone softened, as if lowering his voice protected her from the others. "You spoke in the old court dialect," he said. "Where did you learn it?" Her breathing quickened. "I studied on my own." "Which means you had no access to archives, professors, or preservation labs." "No," she murmured. "And yet," he said, "you just dismantled one of the most sophisticated forgeries I've seen in decades." The consultants shifted uncomfortably. Their reputations were disintegrating by the second. Rashid leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice even further. "I want to understand something, Lena." Her name, spoken for the first time in this room, made her chest ache in a way she didn't expect. "You knew speaking up could cost you your job," he said. "Why did you do it?" Her answer came out before she could hide it. "Because lies destroy things quietly." He studied her for a long moment, as though the sentence carried more wisdom than anything said tonight. Then he gestured to the manuscript. "This forgery. How dangerous is it outside this room?" Lena hesitated. "Very." "Explain." She breathed deeply, gathering her thoughts. "It wasn't made to be a simple fake. It was engineered to pass standard tests. That means whoever created it has resources, knowledge, and confidence. They weren't guessing, sir. They were targeting someone powerful enough to make it meaningful." A cold ripple moved through the men behind them. "And if I had signed," he pressed, "they would have owned the narrative," she replied. "You would have been bound by silence, your reputation compromised, and every future acquisition you made questioned." His eyes sharpened with understanding. "Financial damage," she added softly, "is only one layer. They wanted your credibility." Rashid exhaled slowly, a controlled release of tension. The room felt smaller now, more dangerous, as if the walls themselves finally understood the magnitude of what almost happened. Lena stepped back, needing space, needing to breathe. But Rashid followed with his gaze, calm, steady, unshaken by the chaos swirling around them. Truth had not just exposed a scheme, it had redrawn the hierarchy of the room. Sometimes, the moment you uncover a lie is the moment you start becoming someone new. The curator finally broke, not into anger this time, but into pleading. "Sheikh Rashid, please," he said, voice trembling. "You must understand, we acted based on the information provided. We were misled just as you were." "No," Rashid replied, tone flat as stone. "You were comfortable." The curator froze. "You didn't look deeper. You didn't challenge anything. You expected your titles to substitute for verification." He paused. This woman had neither title nor authority. Yet she saw everything. Lena felt her stomach twist. Praise felt dangerous, unnatural, like someone shining a spotlight on a creature evolved for darkness. The London consultant stepped forward, face flushed. If she is so certain, then let her explain how the forgery was constructed. Let her walk us through the entire process. His tone was a trap, an attempt to expose her, humiliate her, force her into an expert's role she had no formal right to claim. But Rashid turned to her gently. "Only if you wish." She felt dozens of eyes pressing on her, the fear of visibility crawling up her spine. But the manuscript's false glimmer still sat on the table like a wound she could not ignore. She nodded once. "Very well," she whispered, and then she began. "The forgery starts with template manuscripts from the early 1500s, she said. You can see remnants of their line spacing, slightly wider than the 14th century Bahrani standard. The London consultant's jaw tightened. She continued. The forger scraped original vellum pages to thin them, then applied a false aging compound. The discoloration pattern is uneven, because real medieval storage leaves darker edges, not darker centers." Rashid nodded slowly, absorbing every word. She moved to the gilding. The gold leaf was applied using a modern adhesive. It fluoresces evenly under spectrographic light. She paused. "Old gold doesn't do that." The curator sank into a chair. "And the script?" Her voice softened. "The scribe copied from digital reproductions. You can see where he hesitated. Micro pauses that break the rhythm of someone trained in court protocol. The script is perfect in shape, but dead in cadence." Rashid tilted his head. "Dead?" "Yes," she said simply. "Authentic scribes write like breathing. This script breathes like a machine." Silence stretched across the room. Even the security officers seemed to be listening now. "And the dedication leaf?" Rashid asked. "That," she said, "is the real giveaway. The phrasing uses a construction found only in post-dissolution ceremonial texts, specifically ones written for royal weddings 2 centuries later." The London consultant attempted one last defense. "This is absurd. She's making leaps based on obsolete academic models." "No, I'm not," she said quietly. "I'm making conclusions based on patterns no machine can detect, only a trained linguist, or a royal chronicler." The room stilled. Something shifted in the sheikh's eyes. Something like understanding, or respect, or perhaps recognition of the depth she had been hiding under her silence. He stepped closer. "You have spent your life studying this," he said, not as a question, but as an observation. She didn't deny it. "Then why," he asked softly, "are you serving water in a hotel?" Her breath caught. Her throat tightened. Every answer she had ever swallowed rose like a tide. Before she could speak, the chief advisor interrupted with false calm. "Sir, the seller should be informed that the transaction is halted. We must proceed with caution." Rashid glanced at him. "Caution is exactly what we lacked until now." His eyes returned to her, steady, unyielding, waiting. "You saw what none of us did," he said, "and I suspect that is no accident." Her chest tightened. The room had turned, entirely. She had gone from invisible to indispensable. Sometimes the truth doesn't elevate you. It reveals you. To yourself first, and then to everyone else. The room had thinned into two worlds. The shaken, humbled experts on one side, and the quiet woman they had mocked standing alone on the other. Rashid now addressed her openly, as though she were the only one in the room whose words still mattered. "Lena," he said, "you understand the implications of this forgery better than anyone." She clasped her hands behind her back to hide the tremor. "I understand the patterns, sir. That's all." "No," he replied. "You understand integrity." A flicker of heat stung her eyes. Not tears, just the shock of being spoken to without dismissal. She steadied her breathing, grounding herself in the grain of the wooden table beneath the manuscript. Rashid motioned to his chief advisor. "Bring me the folder." The advisor hesitated, unsure. When he slid the executive binder forward, Rashid opened it and removed a single clipped document, a formal letter embossed with the seal of the Gulf Forensic Heritage Institute. He placed it on the table between them. "This," he said, "was intended for the experts I trusted tonight. A preliminary offer to join my advisory board on cultural acquisitions. It was meant to be signed tomorrow." The consultants stiffened, every one of them realizing they were watching their futures slip through their fingers. Rashid looked at Lena. "But after what I've seen," he continued, "it would be irresponsible to give this position to any of them." Her breath stilled. He slid the document closer. "I want you to take it." Her heart lurched, painful, disorienting. She took a slow step back, shaking her head. "Sir, I can't. I don't have credentials anymore. I never finished my degree. I'm undocumented in half the systems that matter. I serve tables. I can't accept something like, 'You earned it,'" he said. She swallowed hard. "I can't even prove who I am academically. My research died when I lost my scholarship." Rashid regarded her quietly. "Then we revive it." She froze. "I will sponsor your academic restoration," he said. "Every missing record, every lost document, every credential you were denied. We retrieve it. You deserve to stand as who you are, not who life forced you to become." Her knees nearly buckled. "I don't want pity," she whispered. "This is not pity," he said. "This is recognition." The room felt too small now, too full of oxygen. She looked at the consultants. Every face tilted toward her with bitterness, envy, disbelief. The curator muttered under his breath, "This is madness." Rashid responded without turning. "Madness," he said, "is trusting people who fear truth more than error." He returned his attention to her. "I'm asking you," he said softly, "to take the place you've already proven you deserve." She stared at the document. Her future, the one she had buried under debt and fear, suddenly glimmered inches from her fingertips. But she couldn't move. Her body wouldn't let her. "Sir," she whispered, "if I step into this world, I can never go back to being invisible." Rashid nodded once. "That," he said, "is the point." A tremor went through her, not of fear, but of awakening. Sometimes the door you feared opening is the one that was always meant for you. For a long moment she didn't touch the document, not out of doubt in its authenticity. She could see the embossed seal, the watermark, the microtext along the margin, but out of doubt in herself. It felt surreal, unreal, dangerous. The kind of opportunity people like her didn't receive unless there was a catch. "Why me?" she whispered. Rashid studied her as if weighing the past she never spoke about. "Because brilliance that hides itself is still brilliance, and because I won't reward arrogance when truth sits quietly in the corner." She glanced at the experts. Their faces were taut with humiliation. One consultant couldn't meet her eyes. Another looked as if he might argue but thought better of it. The curator's gaze held something darker, the wounded pride of a man who believed expertise was a privilege reserved for him alone. She stepped closer to the table again, heart pounding. Her fingertips hovered above the letter. Rashid's voice softened to an almost private register. "I'm not asking for loyalty. I'm asking for competence. And you've shown more competence tonight than any advisor I've had in years." Her throat tightened. "If I accept, my life changes." "Yes," he said simply. "It should." She turned slightly away, struggling to breathe through the sudden flood of emotions. The weight of years pressed against her, the unpaid tuition, the research she had abandoned, the tiny room behind her landlady's kitchen, the nights she read ancient scripts under a flickering bulb while pretending scholarship still had a place for her. "You said earlier," she murmured, "that lies destroy things quietly." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Truth does too." Rashid nodded. "Sometimes destruction is necessary." She exhaled a shaky breath, trying to steady her hands. She felt the room watching her, every eye assessing, calculating, waiting. Her voice, when it came, was a whisper that felt like opening a locked door inside her own ribs. "If I join you, I want real work, real autonomy, no ceremonial role. You'll have it, and I won't let anyone silence me again." "Good," he said. "I would never hire someone who accepts being silenced." The simplicity of the reply nearly broke her. She finally picked up the document. The paper was thick, impossibly smooth. The kind used for contracts that shaped careers, not receipts for menial labor. Her name wasn't printed anywhere yet, only a blank line waiting. Her fingers trembled as she held it, not with fear, but with something far more fragile, the realization that she could become the woman she once believed she might be. Behind her, the London consultant muttered bitterly, "This sets a dangerous precedent." Rashid didn't turn. "Yes," he said, "it does." The curator snapped, "You'll replace years of accredited expertise with a waitress." Rashid answered calmly, "I'll replace incompetence with ability." Lena set the document down, carefully. "I need one night," she said quietly. "To think, to breathe, to understand what accepting this means." Rashid inclined his head. "You may have that." Something in the room shifted. A subtle realignment, as if every man present suddenly understood she was no longer a peripheral figure. She had become the axis, the fulcrum, the point around which this entire night now revolved. As she stepped back from the table, the manuscript, the forgery, shimmered faintly under the spectrographic lamp. A symbol of everything she had spent her life studying. A symbol of how close she had come to watching truth be buried under wealth and certainty. She looked at it one last time, and something inside her settled, a quiet knowledge that the world she had feared approaching was already hers. Sometimes the threshold is not a doorway. It's the moment you decide not to disappear. The manuscript, the forgery, now rests inside an evidence vault under climate control. The men who once dismissed her avoid speaking her name in public. And Lena is no longer a shadow. She works in a quiet archival suite overlooking the Gulf, her desk lined with vellum fragments, mineral samples, and spectrographic scans. Her identification badge reads Forensic Linguistic Specialist, a title she once whispered to herself in college libraries, never imagining it could attach to her life. Her room behind the landlady's kitchen is gone. She rents a small studio now, bright, clean, with a real desk for her research notebooks. She doesn't walk softly anymore. The world no longer expects her to disappear. Every morning she arrives early, brewing strong tea before the Institute wakes, savoring the silence not as a hiding place but as territory, hers. Sometimes the sheikh visits, not with ceremony, but with questions. He listens. He trusts her judgment. And she never forgets the moment she spoke up, terrified, and changed the trajectory of her life. Truth didn't save her. She saved herself by speaking it. If you want more stories like this, subscribe, share, and let the next truth find you.